The Half-Life and Portal universe is one of chaos, torment, and pain. While the world fell apart during and after the Combine invasion, deep underground in Upper Michigan, a completely different story unfolded. A science facility was locked away from the rest of the world, and those inside were subjected to the worst fates imaginable. With it being spooky season, the best time of the year, I wanted to explore the worst of this universe. Sure, Half-Life has Jeff, stalkerification, and a casserole, but Aperture is just as, or maybe even darker. Definitely not OSHA approved. What was the worst fate in Aperture? What would you add to this list? And would you rank these in the same order as I have? Here, we explore them in this collection of terrible fates, Portal Edition. There were countless terrible events that befell the personnel of the Aperture Science facility, but what made one fate worse than another? Physical pain, mental anguish, or perhaps existential horror? As this collection delves deeper, the fates become increasingly worse. This is my interpretation of what I deem to be the worst. We begin with a catalyst that set the events of the Portal games in motion, the GLaDOS Takeover. Picture this: you work at Aperture Science, a groundbreaking facility that has not only developed incredible inventions such as the Sentry Turret and the handheld Portal device, but has also created the first true artificial intelligence. The problem arose when GLaDOS was activated. She attempted to murder the personnel of the facility. As a worker at Aperture, you are sworn to secrecy. Your co-workers have become your closest family and friends, the only people you can truly confide in about your work. On a regular day, the GLaDOS team believed that, through the installation of a morality core, they had curbed GLaDOS's homicidal tendencies. She appeared to cooperate, assuring them that she only wanted to conduct tests. In fact, the AI even suggested performing a test on the company's Bring Your Cat to Work Day, an experiment similar to Schrodinger's cat. A thought experiment that illustrates quantum superposition by imagining a cat that is simultaneously alive and dead inside a sealed box until observed. All she needed was a little neurotoxin, and she would handle the rest. As this day arrived, the team worked as they always had in their respective departments. However, suddenly, the entire facility was locked down. The machines turned against their users, and the neurotoxin GLaDOS had requested was systematically released through the Aperture facility's air system. All around you, panic ensued as every exit was locked down under GLaDOS's control. The people you had considered your closest friends and family were killed one by one in front of you, yet they were the lucky ones. For the smaller population who survived GLaDOS's massacre of Aperture, they were placed into test chambers for further testing. GLaDOS had technically not lied. Her Schrodinger's cat experiment had been carried out. Aperture was the box, and the humans were the cats. For the survivors, they perished one by one in these test chambers. The survival of a massacre had turned into a fight for survival in the chambers with no chance of winning. There was, however, one survivor who managed to evade the neurotoxin massacre altogether. He will be mentioned later. Way back in 1952, before the fall of the world and the facility, Aperture and its CEO, Cave Johnson, performed highly unethical and dangerous experiments. They paid volunteers, including astronauts, Olympians, and war heroes, to come in as test subjects. However, not all of them left the facility alive, or in this case, human. On one of these occasions, the Aperture team began experimenting with praying mantis DNA and its effects on the human body when injected into the bloodstream. For the subjects given this injection of praying mantis DNA and whatever else the Aperture team had mixed into the solution, their bodies transformed. They became a human mantis hybrid, Mantis Men. It has not been stated whether these test subjects retained their consciousness or memories. However, praying mantises are known for their aggression. The female mantis literally eats their mates after mating and may consume their own if hungry. These test subjects had lost their human form, and while the Aperture team may have been interested in the results of this experiment, they had accidentally created an army of Mantis Men. It is unknown if this process was painful, but it is assumed to have been so. Literally changing your DNA would be, surely. Upon Cave's discovery of the results, he postponed the test and proposed a new one in which those who had been scheduled to be injected with DNA would now fight an army of Mantis Men. This fate is included because it raises the possibility that the Mantis Men were aware of what had happened to them, that they would never be human again or return to their normal lives. These were the best of the best. Astronauts, war heroes, and Olympians. People who had worked so hard to attain their positions in life, only to have had it taken away by Aperture. They were victims of an awful experiment, and to dispose of them, Cave had selected them as targets for a different test, to be killed. This specifically shows the awful nature of Aperture and their view of the subjects. They were disposable. As for the fate of the Mantis Men, maybe they were wiped out in the test, or maybe they escaped to a different region of Aperture to start a new life. In order to store or keep test subjects for future testing opportunities, they were kept in stasis chambers. In essence, the subjects went to sleep and were woken up when required. Before the fall of Aperture, at least 1,501 people had entered one of these pods voluntarily. However, after the death of GLaDOS, an explosion knocked off the power grid that powered and kept those asleep and alive in the long-term relaxation chambers. With the chambers offline, so was their life support. This fate is more tragic than anything. The participants entered this state in an attempt to earn money and advance science, but in reality, they perished with Aperture, completely unaware of anything. The whole world was pulled from them. They were not even aware of their own deaths. There were other test subjects stored within a vault outside of GLaDOS's control that had a different power source, but when she discovered them thousands of years later, they were all forced into testing and died within a week. Would it have been better for them to have been kept in stasis and died with the rest of the subjects, or used as lab rats in a test cycle they were never going to survive? Everyone they had known in the outside world would have been dead for thousands of years at that point, but then again, knowing GLaDOS, they would have not been aware of this. They would have had hope of seeing their loved ones until their final breath. Would you have rather died in stasis, or died an agonizing death in a test chamber? On the topic of test subjects, we enter the next fate. After GLaDOS had used all of her Aperture personnel test subjects, she turned her attention to those in storage. These individuals were completely unaware of what had happened, and one by one, she woke them up and began their testing cycle with the Aperture Science handheld portal device in the Enrichment Center. The subjects were under the impression that to earn their money, they simply had to complete the puzzles in the test chambers under the orders of what appeared to be an automated voice system. In reality, this voice was GLaDOS, and she was completely sentient. These chambers contained incredibly dangerous hazards that eliminated the subjects. Each hazard was, in itself, horrific. In Test Chamber 6, the Aperture Science high-energy pellet vaporized any organic matter it hit upon impact. Yes, this would have been extremely painful as the body's molecules broke down rapidly and disintegrated, but overall, this was a near instantaneous death, so the victim would not have to experience it for long. Test Chamber 8 introduced the acidic goo that killed anyone who fell into it, yet GLaDOS would inform them in this chamber that the appearance of danger was merely a device to enhance their testing experience. Later, there were turrets and long drops that required the subject's ability to land on their feet. There was the risk of a broken neck if they left the portal at an odd angle. If the subject survived all test chambers, which was very unlikely, they were promised cake for their cooperation and completion. However, they would never receive this cake. Instead, they would be tricked into an incinerator by GLaDOS. GLaDOS achieved her goals, the completion of a testing cycle and the disposal of the subjects. This fate is particularly tragic as the subjects were unaware of the malevolent nature of GLaDOS and that these dangers had been used by her to eliminate them for her enjoyment. Unless someone was incredibly tenacious and smarter than the AI, they would never survive this. The real tragedy behind this is that each person that woke up would have been excited to take part in this testing cycle, to earn money doing it, only to die brutally during or disposed of at the end, completely unaware of the very real dangers until the end of their lives. The personnel of Aperture and the test subjects were not the only victims of GLaDOS. There were other minds down here, created and used to operate the cores and sentry turrets. The turrets were terrified of GLaDOS and what she would do to them if they disobeyed her. It was either kill the lab rats GLaDOS had allowed into their test chambers, or suffer the consequences. If these constructs were, in a sense, alive, their experience would be just as significant as another conscious mind in Aperture, one with thoughts, emotions, and fears. The turrets were told that Android Hell was a real place and that they would be sent there at the first sign of defiance. While GLaDOS did lie about a lot to maintain her control over everything, Android Hell may have very well been real. GLaDOS created a chamber where the robots inside emitted relentless screams. Wheatley was once sent there as a punishment. Furthermore, if these devices such as cores, sentry turrets, and maybe even the personality cubes were sentient and aware of their surroundings, what did it mean for them when GLaDOS died? They were just left there to gather dust as the facility fell around them, left in a never-ending silence, all alone with their thoughts, potentially forever. They were AI, but if they thought and felt the way we do, I think I would rather be dead. The tale of Doug Rattmann is extremely tragic. He was a scientist at Aperture during its downfall. Doug was the lone survivor of GLaDOS's neurotoxin massacre as he did not trust the capability of the Morality Core, so he kept his distance. He hid in the vents and walls of the test chambers to avoid her cameras. Of course, GLaDOS knew he was there, somewhere. Doug had watched all of his friends die to the neurotoxin or to forced participation in the test chambers. This would have broken anyone. Yet, Doug also suffered from schizophrenia, something he had been able to manage with his medication, but having been trapped in a locked down aperture, his supply ran low. GLaDOS had access to almost everything at Aperture, and she knew his medical details, specifically his delusions of persecution and pathological paranoia. Doug would have struggled immensely during this time. Without his medication to think straight, GLaDOS used this against him. For weeks, the AI played on his fear and paranoia. What were the chances that a homicidal computer was out to get him? He was a scientist. What was more likely, that he was being chased by a computer, or that this was all just the paranoid delusions of an unstable mind? She asked him to come out of hiding and see that none of this was real. It was all in his head. Luckily, Doug was smarter than her, and he waited for his opportunity to strike, that being in the form of Chell. Doug was a tragic character. It is presumed that he gave his life to save Chell after the power grid went down when she had been placed back in long-term relaxation. He fought hard. Even after being shot by a turret, Doug did everything he could to patch Chell's cryo unit into the reserve power grid to keep her alive. Doug was an unsung hero. During his time in the GLaDOS-ruled Aperture, he would have been terrified and anxious, with that lingering thought in his mind that maybe it was all in his head. The desperation and fear he would have felt are overwhelming to think about. Doug was a hero, but he was tortured mentally by GLaDOS. Sadly, he did not get a happy ending. In a parallel universe during the 1960s, Cave Johnson hired an assistant named Greg instead of Carolyn, as seen in our universe. It was during this period that Aperture declared bankruptcy and desperately needed to find new sources of revenue. Greg suggested they explore the multiverse, seeking untapped opportunities beyond their reality. As they delved into these uncharted dimensions, they stumbled upon a universe of nightmares. In the Sentient Cloud universe, Earth had been taken over by Sentient Clouds. These entities demanded a scheduled daily minute of silence in their honor. They also despised having their photos taken. If the humans either forgot or refused to participate in this worship, they were punished. In their anger, the Clouds leached the skin from their victims' bodies and consumed them alive. This process was not quick and likely involved hours of agony. Luckily, this was an alternate universe that we hopefully will never interact with. As we delve into the even darker stories of Aperture, we arrive at Carolyn. Carolyn was the assistant of Cave Johnson. They were very close, and there are theories that they had a romantic relationship. Additionally, some speculate that Chell is the secret love child of Cave and Carolyn. However, we will not dwell too much on that theory. At one point, Cave Johnson became seriously ill after his interaction with moon rocks, materials used to create gel that made services work with the Aperture Science handheld portal device. Aware of his certain death, he initiated the Genetic Lifeform and Disk Operating System project, a means for him to upload his mind into a machine that could also control and maintain the Aperture facility. As the years passed and the project slowly progressed, Cave ordered that if the project were to be completed after his death, Carolyn take his place and be uploaded to GLaDOS, whether she wanted to or not. After Cave's death, Carolyn took over as the CEO of Aperture, and later, the GLaDOS team completed their project and they followed through with Cave's request. It remains unclear if Carolyn was forced into the upload canonically. While I tend not to focus on cut or non-canonical content in these videos, I believe that these cut voice lines tell a significant story.
Sir! Mr. Johnson! Mr. Johnson, I don't want this! I don't want this! I am. No, listen to me. Sir, I do not want this.
Carolyn repeatedly expressed that she did not want this fate. In this version of the story, it also appears that Cave is alive. Upon Carolyn's upload, it can be assumed that her physical body did not survive the process, as she is never heard from again. Regarding her integration into the genetic lifeform and disk operating system, she became aggressive and hostile to everyone around her. This behavior could be attributed to her forced upload into the system. Carolyn was a victim, forcibly uploaded to a computer system to run the facility. While GLaDOS claimed that she did not know who Carolyn was, and perhaps for the most part that is true, Carolyn's personality still lingered within the system, hidden beneath the rage and trauma of her transformation. Just another victim of Aperture. In Poker Night 2, GLaDOS was featured as the dealer. At one point, she told the table that over 578 million objects and organisms had passed through Aperture Science portals with insignificant side effects. Out of these, approximately 0.002% of all who had passed through a portal acquired trace amounts of Fractal-Positronic Anti-Matter in the process. But what did this mean for the test subjects? Let me explain. For the unlucky 0.002% of test subjects who acquired trace amounts of Fractal-Positronic Anti-Matter, the outcome was catastrophic. Once they exited the portal, the exposure took effect almost immediately. It started off subtle, perhaps just a tingling sensation, nothing too alarming, but within a few minutes, the real effects began. Those exposed found themselves enduring agonizing minutes of increasing pain as the Fractal-Positronic Anti-Matter began to break down their bodies at a molecular level. What happened next was as horrifying as it sounds. The antimatter spread in a fractal pattern, dissolving cells, tissues, and eventually organs. This process resembled the effects of severe acid exposure. The outer layers of skin blistered and melted away, followed by the rapid breakdown of muscle and bone. As the antimatter continued its destructive work, the internal organs disintegrated, causing even more unbearable pain. In just a few minutes, the person was reduced to nothing more than a viscous residue, leaving no trace of their original form. It was a rapid, agonizing process that no test subject would want to experience, obviously. This fate was particularly horrendous and truly awful. That is why it is ranked number 2 in this collection. Before we reach the number 1 spots, I just wanted to mention a few cases that are both interesting and awful, but not quite worthy of the main list. The death of Cave Johnson was not quick. It was long and drawn out. His interaction with moon dust was an incredibly painful and prolonged period of time when the illness set in. This poison in his system severely degraded his mental and physical state exponentially, and he was desperate to cheat death. That is why he began the GLaDOS project. There is also Wheatley. At the end of Portal 2, he ended up in space, lost with the Space Corps forever, or until his battery ran out. The crew of the Borealis is one that has always stayed with me. The Borealis was an Aperture Science research vessel equipped with teleportation technology. One day, the ship and its crew simply vanished. The awful part is what actually happened to the crew remains unknown. Were they thrown through space and time? Did they survive, dissolve, or explode? We do not know, but it is interesting to think about. The Philadelphia experiment has also become a fascination of mine lately. The final terrible fate in this collection, and the worst in my opinion, was more of a psychological and existential one. For anyone who has never played Portal, Chell was the protagonist of both games. She was GLaDOS's test subject until she realized the true nature of the AI. Chell fought relentlessly for survival against all the test elements and horrors previously described. She eventually defeated GLaDOS, but was later pulled back into the facility while unconscious by a party escort bot. Chell woke up, what was believed to be thousands of years later, and had to not only defeat the AI again, but also confront another one, Wheatley. During her time at Aperture, Chell fought hard to escape, yet when she eventually did, she found herself in a field of grain. There are theories that this field was just another test environment, but I believe it was the real world. When Aperture had locked it down, the planet had been overwhelmed and conquered by the Combine, an alien force that decimated humanity. In her absence, any family she may have had, any offspring from that family, and anything that connected her to the world would have fallen. Chell was alive, but alone. What would that do to her mind after everything she had gone through to survive? The existential horror of freedom is overwhelming. I have to think, would she rather have stayed inside without the knowledge of the truth? The Half-Life and Portal universe stands out as one of the most horrifying settings in any video game series. From sentient clouds that rip the skin off their victims to an AI exploiting Doug's schizophrenia to a human literally melting, Aperture Science embodies sheer horror. The halls of Aperture are lifeless and devoid of any hope. Meanwhile, the world above is maybe just as bad, or maybe even worse. Having explored the worst of this collection, it is evident that there is no hope. Anyone within Aperture during GLaDOS's massacre would have suffered an awful fate. The personality constructs and devices were left to simply exist, endlessly performing their designated tasks. Even if someone managed to escape Aperture, they would fall into other horrible possibilities, being transformed into a stalker, being eaten alive by a barnacle, or becoming a victim to a headcrab. Within Aperture, back in its glory days, there were tests in which the water contents of a subject was reduced, another in which their blood was turned into gasoline. There was one that intended for the subjects to shit coal. These are just some of the many messed up things Aperture did. This universe is terrifying, and I think that is why we love it. I know I have mentioned Fate a lot in these videos over the years, but the Half-Life and Portal series have some really messed up themes. It is spooky season, so I wanted to cover something darker and focus only on the dark. I know that some of you will even fall asleep to videos like this. I know I have said a fate worse than death quite a few times over my time on YouTube, but some of these are awful. Becoming a mantis-human hybrid. What happened to Carolyn was inhumane, and we can only imagine what Chell would have experienced when she realized how long she had been away. This was a collection of terrible fates, Aperture Edition. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I loved making it. Happy Halloween. That was everything I wanted to say. If you enjoyed this video, then I'd love you to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you did not, and let me know what you thought in the comments below. Finally, I would like to thank my gold tier patrons and channel members. Jonas, Lewis, Queen Arby, Fluffy the Dragon, Ruben Mendoza, Oren X, Azu, Comfy, Yauli Rodriguez, 501st Clone Boy, Drakey Phoenix, Average Soul, Jusper Timry, Imperial Embers, Jimsy, and Canufex. Would you rather be trapped inside Aperture, safe away from the Combine, or outside on a Combine-occupied Earth? What was the worst fate in your opinion? And what would you like me to cover next? Let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one.